Welcome and well met, all my fellow warriors of light, and thank you for joining me here as we talk about more of what's going on in the world of Final Fantasy XIV. This time we're going to be trying to delve into the mind of a new antagonist that we were introduced to in 6.1 and 6.2, Golbez. Golbez, or the Knight in Black, is a mysterious figure that we've only just begun to scratch the surface with. He's a figure that lurks in the shadows and is plotting something big, and it looks like we're about to get a front row view of it. So please join me as I go into more details as to what I think that Goldbez is plotting, who he is, how he is involved in all this, and how this could end up changing everything for us for the new story for 7.0. Before I go any further though, let this be a warning that this video will be containing spoilers up to 6.2, so please watch at your own risk. Also, this theory is mostly to my imagination, so please take what I say here with a grain of salt, and we'll see how close I get to the answers. Alright, so let's start off with a quick summary of everything we know so far. After the final days, we were able to defeat Medion, we saved the world. The Warrior of Light is trying to go back to the beginning by becoming a simple adventurer again. Good luck with that. But otherwise, during this time, they, along with some of their former Scion allies, had accidentally discovered a small void gate within ruins beneath the Bounty. This void gate, as its name suggests, is an actual portal to the void, or the 13th reflection itself. We quickly learned that it was actually Vitra, the youngest of Midgardsormr's children, who had created and later sealed it away. Vitra explains to us some of his long history. How his sister Azdaja had flown into a void gate thousands of years prior in a desperate attempt to defeat the Cloud of Darkness, who had allied with Emperor Xande of the Alagan Empire. Vitra had since founded the city of Razadhan and commissioned the portal be enlarged by the alchemists early in the city's beginning in an attempt to be able to venture into the void and rescue Azdaja. Though when he succeeded in creating the portal, he quickly realized the danger that the people would be in if even one powerful voidsent managed to escape, and thus he had the gate sealed away immediately. With some encouragement from his people and the Scions, however, he decided to lift the seal and ventured with the Warrior of Light, Estinian, and Yashola, who is determined to learn the secret of being able to pass over into other reflections, and the four of them ventured into the void to search for Azdaja. While there, we are introduced to Zero, who turns out is half mortal, half voidsent, and had previously been bound to Xenos against her will. She acts as a sort of guide for us around the 13th, where she tells us about how this world works, just what are the rules that you need to know to survive here. Now, because of the nature of this world, because of the very nature of darkness itself, death doesn't work here as we've come to associate it with. So instead of a soul finding rest when they die, they're either immediately reformed or their ether is devoured by another more powerful voidsent. Now, of course, the 13th wasn't always like the dark void that we know it today. Zero informs us about how a world that was once filled with both light and darkness, but with people, mountains, oceans, forests, how it all ended up like this. She explains that at one point this world was at peace, but then the Ascians arrived and taught the secrets of summoning to men. So it's just like when people in the Source summon forth primals, except they refer to them as Eidolons. So the people of the 13th were summoning powerful Eidolons, and just like with primals, they drained the land of ether and tempered souls into fanatical worship. This ended up sparking a war known as the Counter Memoria. During this war, heroes who were blessed with the power to seal such beings away inside crystal, known as Memorites, came forth to deal with these Eidolons. In the end, their victories were assured, but like with Oversight of the Source, eventually the ether of the imprisoned Eidolons started to bleed out of the crystals. It was only a little bit at a time, but it was still enough to corrupt some of the heroes who felt them. They were seduced by the dark powers and thus were transformed into monsters, attacking other people and turning them into voidsent. And Zero then explained that eventually this caused the war to shift in its balance and somehow accidentally triggered the Flood of Darkness, transforming all the remaining survivors into Voidsents. So we basically have an entire world of dark aspected creatures trapped in a world of eternal night, where strength rules over everything else. That weaker Voidsents either are devoured or they have to submit to a stronger master to survive. While we're here, we learn of Golbez, who seems to have captured Azdaja and has slowly been feeding her to his 4 strongest servants, the 4 archfiends, to increase their strength. As of right now, it is confirmed that Azdaja is still alive, but it doesn't seem likely that we are going to be able to rescue her without dealing with both Golbez and his remaining archfiends. 2 of them, Scarmelione and Barbaricia, have already been defeated and transformed into crystal, which is currently in our possession, but that still leaves the remaining 2 archfiends waiting in the wings. Out of all of them, Golbez is by far the most dangerous because he has a plan that he's sticking to a very strict schedule about, and it does seem like he's getting ready to enact it. The question is now, though, what is this plan? What is it that he's plotting to do, and what is going to be our role in this future battle? Well, to start off with, let us look a little closer at Golbez as a character. For any fans of the Final Fantasy series, they know that he was a major character in Final Fantasy IV. He was our main antagonist throughout most of the game, and he's a very powerful sorcerer who directly opposed to the main protagonist of the story, Sissel. I don't want to spoil the story for anyone who hasn't played through 4 yet, but it is a pretty good game, so if you get a chance to play it, I would strongly recommend that you do. But I guess the best way to sum up Golbez from 4 while keeping the spoilers down to a minimum, it would be that Golbez was a man who was both a master manipulator while also being manipulated before seeking for a way to redeem himself. Now, just remember that this is who he was in Final Fantasy IV, but this Golbez that we have in 14 is not the same person. He's not the same character from that game. Just like how we have a very different Kryl in this game than we do in her original appearance in Final Fantasy V, this is a new and different version. This Golbez, though, is still a very powerful being, but in this case, he's a Voidsent, and likely the most powerful Voidsent within the Void that we know of. But from what we've learned from the other Voidsent, though, he does very rarely make an appearance. He's content to let his servants fight his battles for him, but we learn that rumors are going around that he has been devouring smaller and weaker Voidsent to gain power, meaning he may be planning to make a move soon. At the end of 6.2, Golbez is not only fully aware of our group, but he is aware that we have the Memorite, Zero, with us, and the remaining 2 Archfiends are planning to deal with them. In fact, Ruben Conte, the Archfiend of Fire, even stated that he is willing to sacrifice anything for this plan of Golbez. Golbez keeps talking about his army and preparing for battle, so it's clear he's planning for some kind of war, but against who? I mean, it doesn't seem like he's plotting against another Voidsent because he's pretty much brought most of the Void under his heel. So he's after something far bigger for such a massive army. Also important to know is that during the ending cutscene with him and the other Archfiends in 6.1, Golbez talks to them to focus on their mission for redemption. He definitely seems like someone who is willing to go to any lengths to achieve his goals. He's someone who doesn't care what he has to sacrifice so long as he gets to the ending he desires, whatever that may be. Now, before I go into my full theory for his plans, I do have another theory that I want to address real quick first, and that's the identity of who this Shard of Azim is from the 13th. So right now, the most popular theories is that it's either Zero or Golbez who is the 13th Shard of Azim. Now, I can see it with either or. I mean, if it's Golbez, I think that would be really interesting for us to go up against a corrupted version of Azim's Shard. I would really love to see a scene where the 2 of them are able to talk and interact with each other and really start to understand each other from different points of view. That would definitely be something I would love to see. But personally, I don't think so. With Zero, it just makes sense on several layers, such as why Xenos was so determined to have this particular void synth bond to him. Also, it doesn't necessarily have to mean that just because Zero is Azim's shard, they don't have to rejoin with the Warrior of Light at the end of the story. Many are speculating that we will have no choice but to rejoin with them for some reason because of what happened with Oddbert. But there are some key differences here because Oddbert was just a soul. He didn't have a physical form. And he rejoined with the Warrior of Light to be able to stabilize the abundance of light trapped inside them. Thanks to him, they were able to regain control of that light just long enough to battle against FFXIV. Zero, however, she still has a physical form, and she has a very rare and unique power that they could probably use later on. I would totally love to see her maybe joining the Scions, or at least become an ally of the Scions later down the line. And unless another scenario where the Warrior of Light's soul is in danger of breaking apart, I really don't see the need for them having to trigger another rejoining within the Warrior of Light. So, as interesting as the idea of Golbez being a shard of Azim it would be, I personally think that Zero is more likely the candidate for Azim's shard of the 13th. My biggest reason for this is also how she was saved from both the Flood of Darkness and how the crystal from Hydaelyn reacted around her. The way that Zero was pulled into the rift just before the flood hit her through no specific means does seem like something that Hydaelyn would have done. Not only that, but her crystal of light that we had in our possession reacted directly in Zero's presence, returning her to her original form and freeing her from the excess darkness. So why would the crystal react so strongly in Zero's presence when we were faced off with so many other powerful void synths in the void? So I'm going to be assuming that Zero is another shard of Azim rather than Golbez. I do think this will be important later though. Anyway, returning to the idea of what Golbez is planning. One thing that has always bugged me is how the 13th is different from the other shards. FFXIV stated himself that the 13th was their first attempt to try to rejoin the shards with the source. The Sundering happened roughly 12,000 years ago, and we know that the first calamity, the Calamity of Wind, was the beginning of recorded history in the source. Which means that the 13th becoming the Void had to happen between those times. So I would say roughly between 9 to 10,000 years ago that the 13th became the Void. And it's also important to note that, well, the Ascians didn't have the formula necessary to trigger a proper rejoining yet at this point in time. FFXIV stated that they didn't realize the connection between the shards and with each other until the Flood of Darkness. So I can totally see them maybe experimenting with one of the other shards because they wouldn't want to risk anything happening to the source until they had a real idea of what was going on. So whatever happened here was what taught them what they needed to do to trigger proper rejoinings in the future. Yet at the same time, what about the first? FFXIV seemed pretty content with the Flood of Light wiping out the world there, and was convinced that a rejoining was going to happen if they succeeded. So, what's going on here? Why wouldn't a world consumed by darkness rejoin with the source if a world consumed by light would? What was so different about the 13th? How does it involve Golbez? And why is the barriers between the source and the 13th so unstable that, while I wouldn't say they're common, but definitely people know about rifts opening up into the void? I have a feeling that whatever happened on the 13th involved more than just a simple war. Otherwise, why would the Ascians consider it a useless void? Going back to Golbez, many are talking about how he must be planning to invade the source, or maybe even another reflection, and he would just be bringing all the void sent with them and basically be allowed to eat and feast on all of the ether that they want. At the very least, this would explain the concept of him talking about going to battle and that he's very keen on a war, but I'm not going to completely take it off the table because there's always a chance that might happen, but I have to disagree with this right now for several reasons. First off, it would be kind of underwhelming from a storytelling point of view, considering that we just had the final days. Also, how would they get to the source? I suppose if they could rip open a void gate large enough, I mean, even a tiny planar fissure could work. And given enough, maybe, dedication to the task at hand, the void sense could theoretically force opening of void gates. Though we still don't know why the barriers between the 13th and the source are more unstable than they are with the other shards, to the point that portals can be opened to begin with. The thing is, Golbez clearly knows that a portal that we use to actually enter the void exists. He knows about the gate, and while they have been keeping close tabs on it, he doesn't seem interested in it. You'd think that if he was planning on invading the source or any other reflections, then he would be very interested in any possible gateways to get there. Which leads me to believe that he's not trying to get to the source or any other reflections. I personally think that Golbez is trying to fix the 13th out of one of two ways. Either by triggering another rejoining and having the 13th absorbed into the source, or cleanse the darkness from the 13th entirely and see if it can be restored. Could it be possible that he wants to rejoin the 13th after it was pretty much abandoned by the Ascians? This could be the redemption he's looking for, to lay the void and its denizens to rest once and for all. Obviously, that would trigger another calamity upon the source, but I mean, it's possible he doesn't know about that, or figures that maybe a few thousand lives lost would be worth it if the void is finally put out of its misery. Now, it's unknown if the 13th can be saved at this point, even if they restore the light to the world, restore the ethereal sea, restore the elements. That would be the best case scenario. But then how would they restore the people? Because even if the world is restored, the void scent would just devour all the new ether and eventually leave the world a dead, empty world anyway. I mean, unless they wipe out everything and just decide to let evolution take over and do its job from there all over again, I suppose in a few billion years it could possibly restore itself, but really, I don't know if there is a way for them to restore it to its original state while reversing the damage done to the people. It could be that he would want to see a rejoining happen and would see that as salvation. You know, put them all out of their misery, abandon a broken world, and just be content with being a part of a greater whole. I could see that. I could definitely see that line of thinking. And then again, maybe Golbez does have a method that could return the people to their original states and free them from the extra access of darkness aspected ether. I mean, he's had thousands of years to think of a way, so he could have thought up something during his free time. Anyway, at the end of 6.2, he mentions a prison of passivity being the key to his plan. I personally think he's talking about the moon, for in that same sentence, we see a memory of Golbez upon the moon and standing over a figure robed in white. There were several possibilities of who this could have been, such as Elidibus, Vena, or Unicalhi. Those were the most popular theories. I can't see it being either Elidibus or Vena. I don't see how that would be possible. And I see no reason for him to be interested in going after Unicalhi. Not to mention, look at the size of Golbez. I mean, he's massive, and the figure in white looks to be just as tall as he would be. Which makes me think that this is most likely the Watcher. And if you look behind them, you clearly see what looks like the same seal that once held Zodiark. Now, the Watcher is a construct based off an ancient ally of Vena's, and it's possible each reflection has its own Watcher and is looking after a fragment of Zodiark. I've even heard rumors that people think that it could be Fusoya, who is another character from Final Fantasy IV, and he was the last guardian of an ancient race who watches over something imprisoned on the moon. That would be a nice touch here if you ask me. But why would Golbez want to kill the Watcher? How would he even get to the moon? What reason would he have to go there? I think that Golbez could have desired what was kept sealed away on the moon. So, my full theory, Golbez is seeking redemption to make up for the sins he committed because he was the one who triggered the flood of darkness. MXL stated back in Shadowbringers that in their eagerness and ignorance they erred and made a useless husk of the 13th. The world was destroyed by the flood of darkness, assuming the flood of light is also a safe point of comparison. I believe Golbez was a Memoriite who lived during that time, and he was one of those who was seduced by the power of the Memoria. possibly even possessed by a powerful Eidolon. It wouldn't have been out of the question for Igayorm to have manipulated him into going to the moon with her at some point and try to free the Shard of Zodiark. Remember, the Asians still didn't know how the rejoinings worked at this point. I think they were still kind of experimenting to see what would happen. So they could have decided to try and free a Shard of Zodiark and see if that would have been enough of a trigger to cause a rejoining. So they got Golbez to the moon, which would have been easy by creating a portal for him, and he was the one who killed the Watcher, possibly even absorbing his ether, which may have been enough to either free Golbez from his mind control states of the Eidolon, or give him the knowledge the Watcher had of Hydaelyn, the shards, the sundering, everything. After all, it was kind of hammered into our heads that when a Voidsent absorbs ether, they also gain the victim's memories as well. Either way, Golbez ended up freeing Zodiark, and whatever Eidolon that was controlling him may have abandoned Golbez at that moment and fused with the sundered Zodiark Shard. We've seen in Final Fantasy IV where we end up facing off against a powerful boss by the name of Zemus, later transformed into Zeromus, and I'm not missing out on Zero's name being in there either, I noticed that. Zodiark's original purpose was to save the world, to cause the celestial currents to start flowing naturally once again. If Zodiark was freed but was absorbed by a very powerful Eidolon whose possible only instinct is to eat and devour and just suck up all of the ether that it can, and suddenly was given a massive power boost from Zodiark's shard, most likely it probably would have wanted to eat all that ether and just devour whatever it could until nothing was left. Yet because he was on the moon, Golbez was able to avoid becoming a Voidsent completely, much like how Zero was, and it's even possible he might be half Voidsent himself. I think that if Golbez was on the moon by the time that the Flood of Darkness was triggered, he possibly could have witnessed the entire world falling to darkness. At this point in time, he could still have the powers of a Memorite, which is why other Voidsent fear him. Though lacking the strength to defeat Zeromus once and for all, maybe the best he could have done was to reseal Zeromus up in the same prison that once held Zodiark's Shard. I think though, once Zeromus would have been done with the 13th, it probably would have wanted to go out to maybe the other reflections, maybe even the source. And if Golbez became aware of the other reflections from absorbing the Watcher's ether and gaining their memories, he would have been made aware of the source and feared what Zeromus could have done. He was afraid that Zeromus may have been able to escape and just triggered more floods and just wiping out more life like how he did on the 13th. Since then, Golbez has been preparing for a way to redeem himself and the 13th. But he didn't really start to gain momentum of that plan until Azdaja came to the 13th, and he was able to absorb some of her ether, which gave him the boost he needed to really start gathering up an army. An army that he is trying to make strong enough to face off against Zeromus at the moon. Maybe give him the chance to absorb all that ether for himself, and either trigger another rejoining or restoring the 13th. Okay, so we'll say the best case scenario. Golbez goes back to the moon with his massive army, they face off against Zeromus and defeat him. Golbez is then able to absorb all of that extra ether from Zeromus. What then? How does he plan to restore basically a lost world? Easy, by dropping the moon onto the star itself. I know that sounds crazy, but Yoshi P did state that a massive event is going to be coming to the game and change the entire story in 6.5, and that is what's going to be leading us into the new storyline for 7.0 and onwards. Now, that did sound like he was hinting at another calamity, but after all that's happened in the source, I can't see them burning the whole world a second time. But a calamity upon another shard? I could definitely see that happening. Also, remember, Hydaelyn herself created the moon. The surface is held together by the power of light. That's why nothing can grow there on the lunar surface, just like the empty in the first. So, if Golbez was able to defeat Zeromus and gain his powers, I think he would be more than capable of dropping the moon if he was able to at least knock it out of orbit. So, if the moon full of lights aspected ether was about to drop onto the void, that light could be enough to balance out the darkness, especially if it were to release a vast amount of light ether and cleanse the 13th of at least the worst of the darkness. So it would either restore the world as much as it could be possible at least, or force a calamity to rejoin the world and let them all fade in peace and put their suffering to an end. Either way, whether the 13th is saved or condemned, I think that an event of that apocalyptic scale would be enough to damage the barriers between the reflections, thus weakening the walls between them and causing it to be possible for us to travel to other shards one day, thus entering a brand new storyline. It's a bit out there, but God, it was a lot of fun coming up with such a crazy theory, and I'm really excited to see how much of it I actually got right, if anything at all. I always did like Golbez's character from 4, and I can't help but want to think of this Goldbez as a sympathetic villain. I mean, if there's one thing that 14 knows how to do, it's really to get us to connect with our enemies on a deeper, more emotional level than most other games out there. So you may not necessarily agree with them, but you at least understand why they're doing what they're doing. And I do think we will be learning a lot more of what drives this Golbez's actions very soon. I know that 6.25 is coming out in a few days, and at the earliest we can expect 6.3 would be probably mid-December of this year, but I am holding out hope that they will give such a storied character like Golbez the respect that he is due. If you have any suggestions or ideas, please like, subscribe, and drop a comment down below just to let me know and what you think of this particular theory. Well, that's it for right now. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope that you will be looking forward to what comes next. Until next time, this is Fantasy Girl signing out.